Expired. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel for being here. Thank you for being the voice of small business, which creates 7 out of every 10 new jobs in this country. With the work you're doing is very important, so thanks for being here. A couple of things I wanted to touch on, which may have been addressed earlier. Number one is the process. We took up something called the REINS Act early on in this session, which I believe to be very important because it goes to who decides. The administrative agencies under the executive branch obviously executing their constitutional authority to promulgate rules, but giving the House of Representatives and Congress oversight over that because we are the body closest to the people. We get to consult with you all and hear the real-world impact that these regulations are having. I hope that the Senate will take up consideration of that bill in short order because I think that the process piece is very important. But then becomes the question, if it is brought to us, how best can we find that point of equilibrium, that sweet spot, if you will, between overregulation and underregulation? We certainly talked about a lot during the tax reform debate about finding that point of equilibrium where you're not rates are low enough so that we're competitive and it's not costing us jobs, but they're not so low that we're bleeding revenue to the U.S. government. Same with regulations. It's a matter of finding that point of equilibrium that under regulation, which we can't tolerate either because that poses a threat in a whole host of areas, but not over-regulating where we're strangling businesses and hurting small businesses' ability to create jobs. And lastly, if you could, for our purposes, identify 1 or 2 agencies where you think are the biggest culprits, if you will, of overregulation that's hurting small business.
Okay, I'll try that. You know, many times when there's a problem that needs to be addressed, the stakeholders are in the middle of the problem, want to address the problem, probably have the best answers. They need to help craft how that rule or regulation goes in place. Home builders typically don't like building codes, but we passed a statewide building code in Louisiana because we were going to lose all our insurance companies. There was a problem defined, and the builders helped pass those codes. That's just an example of how you take the stakeholders and tell them we have a problem with something and we need to address it. When I was in high school, you never met an oil field worker that didn't have an arm missing or something. Well, we created workman's compensation programs across the country that do loss control, help people, teach people how not to get hurt because it affects their bottom line when they have to pay more premium because they have an injury. So the more you bring this closer to the people that actually are involved, I think the better the rules and regulations are going to be and the problems will get solved.
I would echo that. That really has been something I consistently have heard from small business owners all over the country is that really they don't have as much of a problem with their state regulators because they know them. There's a relationship there, and they can get to where everybody wants them to be quicker. And I really think a lot of study would be required, quite frankly, and hard work by the regulators to figure out what all agencies are regulating on a specific issue. Because, you know, just as Patrick had pointed out on paperwork, 2 agencies with the same paperwork, this is not a good situation. That is happening across the government. That's happening with federal and state. Why can't you have a situation where if somebody's doing well with this, you know, a state OSHA, for example, that, you know, stamp of approval by them, no issues, then that means that they don't have to worry about federal OSHA. I mean, I just think there's so much more that can be done cooperatively with the different governments, the state and federal, and also just, again, paring everything down so that you're really getting the priority issues addressed and not just having a lot of regulatory underbrush that could really just be used for a gotcha game for small businesses.
Sure, I'll jump in as well. Congressman, thank you for that question. I think I would echo the comments of others and say it's about rigor, it's about awareness, it's about building cooperation and relationship and understanding between agencies and the parties that they regulate. I would probably stop short of picking on a particular agency. We're a very broad group of manufacturers, and I think everybody sort of lives in their own environment in that regard. But that's why we advocate for for regulatory reform measures that really get to the core essence of rulemaking itself, rather than a particular agency or another.
Thank you very much. Gentleman yields back, and his time has expired.